1, 2, 3.
All right. Thank you everyone for joining us for this important discussion on the recent revelations about Pegasus spyware, why it's important, and what we can do about it. My name is Anthony Hu. If we haven't met already, I'm a researcher for the Bahrain Center for Human Rights, and I'll be serving as your moderator today. Before we get started, we have some amazing panelists who took the time to join us. Thank you all. And I want to take some time to introduce our guests in the order that they will be speaking today. First, we have Mohammed Al-Mascati, who is a Bahraini human rights activist and digital security coordinator for Frontline Defenders for the MENA region. He's also the founder and former president of the Bahrain Youth Society for Human Rights, which had a pivotal role in the 2011 popular uprising. In 2019, he was awarded Access Now's Human Rights Heroes Award for providing digital security training to human rights defenders and vulnerable groups throughout the MENA. Then we have BCHR's very own Salwa Bukawit. Salwa is our international office manager and has worked for BCHR for over 8 years and has therefore experienced the evolution of our organization over the years, and as well as the evolution of the human rights situation in Bahrain and the major topics surrounding it. Mohammed Najim is the executive director of the leading digital rights organization in the MENA region, SMEX. His work includes local and regional advocacy campaigns, research on freedom of expression, freedom of privacy, and data protection. Mohammed Najim organizes the yearly event Bread and Net, the first unconference in the MENA region that tackles topics related to technology and human rights. He graduated from the Stanford Draper Hill's Summer Fellows Program in 2019, and in 2021, he was featured in Time magazine as one of the top activists in the Arab region. And last but certainly not least, joining us here today is Amna Mizuni, who is originally a digital and communication specialist. She is the founder of the Cartagena organization, working on documenting Tunisian history and heritage for future generations. Amna is also the co-founder of Digital Citizenship, which is an initiative and consultancy for women and girls' digital inclusion. She is an advocate for open culture and open knowledge and a community leader in the Wikimedia movement globally, with a specific focus on the Tunisian, Arab, and African communities. She is renowned for her contributions to several international entities focusing on human rights and technology. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to participate in our panel today. I'm honored to be moderating this discussion, and I'm really looking forward to hearing everyone's perspectives on this topic. Just for a little more context on our discussion today for our viewers, this event is particularly concerned with discussing the use of surveillance and spyware to target dissidents, steps that can be taken to prevent the continuation and escalation of the use of spyware as a tool of oppression against human rights activists, civil society members, and what can be done to protect civil society from these invasive technologies. After it was confirmed that at least 5 BCHR members had been targeted by Pegasus in Bahrain, as well as many other civil society members, our goal, BCHR's goal in hosting this panel, is to raise awareness about the exploitation of these technologies meant originally to counter crime and terrorism, are instead used as a tool of oppression, and to generate ideas with the help of our panelists' expertise for urgent reforms and what can be done to help resolve these issues moving forward. So if there's nothing else, we'll start off with presentations from each of our speakers today. After all the speakers have concluded their presentations, we'll jump into a quick Q&A, and then the speakers will have the opportunity to give closing statements and talk about takeaways from this discussion before we wrap up the event. So now I'd like to turn the floor to our first speaker, Scotty. Please go ahead.
Great, thank you very much. Thanks for Bahrain Center for Human Rights to organize this. I just have a presentation to show. Sorry for that. Yeah, so first of all, it is important to say, I hope the presentation is showing. Okay, first of all, it's important to say that our focus in last 2 months is mostly about Pegasus. But the bigger question is Pegasus the only company in the world is selling surveillance techniques to our governments in the region. It's the only company targeted to human rights defenders. The answer is no, because if we go to the history, the first company was really exposed. It was Finfisher, when also Bahraini activist was targeted, and it was targeted through their devices and computers. Then also we look to the Italian company, the most well-known at that point, Hacking Team, where also was advanced technology used against human rights defenders in many places. Also, we look to the French company MSIS, the company that sold a lot of surveillance tools to the Libyan regime at that time, and one of or two of the victim torture victim in Libya went to France to complain against the company, and still the case there because they say that the regime was using MSIS as a technology to extract the information from them. So the history is full of companies that sell their tools to repressive governments. The repressive government use that tools to attack human rights defenders. And maybe there is a lot of other tools that we don't know, actually, with some tools that are still hidden, some companies that no one know about them, and definitely in the future we'll know more about them. And definitely this will not stop, because if you look on the history, that governments always want to know what's happening, and the only place that can get all this information is through infect the devices that used by human rights defenders, sometimes 24 hours or most of the time. And that's why this is a very important techniques that the government using. So this is important to say it in the beginning of my presentation. But today I will focus more about Pegasus. When we look on the in general the malware or spyware industry, the main risk, it's totally going to the human rights defenders, right? But if we go beyond that, we will look that there is other risk it's facing. We have family that's also, if we go to the Pegasus, the human rights defenders having his family pictures or friends or colleagues that it could be extract from their devices and taken by the spyware. So the risk is not only against the human rights defenders, human rights defenders as individuals, but also it go beyond that. They go to the family, friends, colleagues. All these people, all the human rights defender environment could be attacked. So it turned to the hostile environments that everyone get involved in that environment will be affected. And that's what usually happening. Like they start with the human rights defenders itself device, then go beyond that. They go to the family, the brother, the wife, the girlfriend, boyfriend. All of these people get affected by the human rights defenders' works. And sometimes they use these techniques for important reason, is to put more pressure on human rights defenders, because when family affected human rights defenders became more pressure, sometimes the family also pressuring the human rights defender to stop the work, to leave the country, to do a lot of things to just stop that kind of surveillance. So it's a very important that is not only when we look about the victim, is not only the human rights defenders. We need to look beyond that, because there is other victims that maybe we don't see them, but if we digging more, that we can see these victims. When we go to the Pegasus itself, why everyone is talking about Pegasus? It's important to understand many things regarding the tools. That tools from NSO, it's an Israeli company, and who is behind this? It's ex-military actually. So they have a lot of experience on spying on people. They have experience on reaching the people informations, getting their information in different ways. So that Pegasus as a tools is looking to the phone as you look to the phone. Like when you are looking to the chat, like I can say that it's when you decide to give your phone to somebody else with the password is the same when you infected with the Pegasus. So they can log to the address box, log to the SMS message, call histories, internet browsing histories, emails, calendars, chat content, pictures, videos, turning the mic, turning the camera. It's like a privilege administration, privilege access to the whole phone. That's how it is Pegasus. So that's why the focus more recently about Pegasus, first of all, the number of customers of Pegasus all the world. Secondly, the number of victims actually also in the world. It's a huge victim, and also the victim is not only human rights defenders, not only journalists, but also there is politicians, there is officials, government officials that get affected. So how the Pegasus actually go to your phone? So the company, what they do is they ask their expert to search on bugs, trying to use that bugs to infect the phone. So what they do, they go to application, operating system, and see how this working and how bugs can be discovered. When they discovered any bugs, in general way, like when anyone discover bugs, like any expert discover bugs, they need to report it to the company. Like when the bugs was in WhatsApp, they need to report it to Facebook, because to let the company solve this. But what happened is actually these experts use that bugs to infect the human rights defenders, and they infect them in two ways. One is called zero click, where you don't need to do anything. You don't need, it's a zero click. You don't need to do anything. Your phone still be infected. And the other way is to click on links. Then when you click on that links, suspicious link, you get infected. So who's approved Pegasus to do the customers? The approved Pegasus is the Israeli government, and especially IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, that's approving Pegasus. And all the government that gets that, it's approved actually directly from Israel. They cannot say that, actually NSO cannot sell to any government that is not approved by Israel. Like it cannot say to sell to like Iranian government, as an example, or sell to Syrian government, because it's not approved by the Israelis government. And then when we come to the way of, can we detect this? In iPhone, maybe it's like, I mean, the chance is high that we can detect it. But with the Android, that's the most problems, that it's almost impossible or no detections regarding iPhones. The bugs usually, and recent, all the victim is because of iMessage bug that used against them and infect their iPhone. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a bug in WhatsApp, and Facebook decided to suit NSO because they use WhatsApp bugs, and that's one of the things that also need to think. When we look on who's responsible of this, like who's responsible, it's not only the company, not only the NSO as a company, but also investors who invest in that company also responsible of this. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, who approve that, also responsible for this. The company customers, I mean, who is using that tools to infect human rights defenders or to infect journalists also responsible for this. The countries where the victims are, like some of the victim is like they are from repressive country, but they are in exile and then they get infected. The company hosting the asylum seeker also responsible for this because that happened in their territory, so also responsible on this. And lastly, the United Nations. Recently, there is a huge talk with special rapporteur and countries under the General Secretary and General Assembly that we need to put restriction on this, a restriction on where these tools go and how it's approved, who can use it, when they use it, and how they use it. So all of these discussion is happening now because, like in the EU, there is a huge discussion about how we can minimizing the impact of these tools and how minimizing the impact of using these tools against the human rights defenders. Last thing is, it's important during the future. Maybe the tools is, I mean, you get infected now. The information extracted for your from your phone, and then there is a huge campaign against this. But the information taken from their devices, from the human rights defender devices, how the government will use them. And I think it could also kind of, this is not for now, maybe it's for the future, like Samir campaign, defamation against the human rights defenders, blackmailing them. And we saw that in many places, that because it's extracting their private information, private picture, they maybe get blacked them. And that's at the end definitely will affect the human rights defenders, because it could be there is a self-censorship that human rights defenders afraid to be attacked, and not only the person, the victim, the human rights defenders that already infected their devices, but other human rights defenders, when they see this, they get also self-censorship, and this also will affect on freedom of expression and also exposing the human rights violation. Thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Mohammed. That was a great presentation, very informative. I think you made some really good points, including the fact about how extensive the reach goes beyond just targeting the individual. It also affects their family, their friends, and their colleagues. And that's just more reasons why Pegasus and the use of Pegasus spyware against human rights defenders is so important. Now we'll turn over to our second speaker. Salwa, please go ahead.
Yeah, you can hear me, right? Yeah, so I'm not an expert on cybersecurity, but I'm very familiar with the challenges faced by BCHR and other human rights NGOs. The challenges that have to do with protecting its team and human rights defenders in general. So the issue of cybersecurity for human rights defenders is not new. In fact, in Bahrain, the government has been spying on its citizens way before the pro-democracy the movement took place. Back then, the type of spying used, like for example, surveillance centers such as the ones sold by Nokia in 2010. But since then, it has made its way up to more sophisticated phone cracking spyware from companies such as the Hacking Team, which Muhammad mentioned, and NSO Group as early as in the 2013. Has become more and more sophisticated, has also made it, the consequence of this has made it more and more difficult for human rights NGOs to protect the team and to counterattack these type of surveillance. Very recently, at least 5 members of the BCHR team have been targeted by these new technologies of cyber attacks and surveillance. In the experience of BCHR members, the new type of attacks are different in the way that you don't need, for instance, to open a message. I think Muhammad also mentioned this. You don't actually need to open the link that you receive on your phone or computer for the attack to reach you. So sometimes you're not even aware that you've been attacked. It's enough for you to just receive a message on your phone or on your computer for the spyware to be installed and initiated. So this evolution is very serious and very worrying for human rights NGOs and defenders, in that we are not up to date on how to protect ourselves and members from these attacks that are directly related to very severe human rights violations. I mean, cyber attacks are a human rights violation in itself, of one's privacy, of one's freedoms of expression. But in the cases of human rights defenders, it can be related to cases of detention, torture, and even extrajudicial killings. And what is worrying is also the international dimension of it, because if it's a human rights defender who's abroad, who is being attacked, it could also affect his family back home. So as a human rights NGO, we've always been concerned about the digital security of our members and have always seek to be up to date on how to be the most efficiently protected. Our members, particularly the ones that are based locally, have always attended digital security trainings and workshops. However, with the recent sophistication of the digital surveillance that we are experiencing, we have become even more worried on whether we are doing enough or whether we can do enough to better protect our members. In other words, the question is, are the available trainings and workshops up to date, and are they evolving at the pace of the sophistication of the technologies? And as Muhammad also mentioned, it's really difficult because we don't even know the details of how these technologies are evolving. So on a more ideological level, the issue behind these insecurities is that the human rights dimension is completely excluded from the cybersecurity laws, policies, and practices. So it's this framework that needs to be changed to one where human rights approaches are put at the center of the international cybersecurity debates. So we need to work more closely with groups that are developing specific policy recommendations that include the human rights dimension. So a little bit on the same note, we need to challenge the idea that we have to weaken cybersecurity for law enforcement in the name of national security. I mean, the national security discourse has existed for a very long time, even before the pro-democracy movements. But now it has become more dangerous considering the digital era that we're experiencing. Thank you. This is what I have.
Thank you so much. So it was well said. It definitely, these recent revelations have really highlighted and brought back to the surface the issue of how spyware and surveillance affects NGO groups work on the ground, especially when they're based in these countries that use technologies like this. You brought up an important issue, which is that the contents that are extracted through these spywares are often used against these human rights defenders, against their families, in ways that leads to more human rights abuses like torture and arbitrary detention and extrajudicial killings. It's really difficult to talk about because at the end of the day, these technologies are used behind closed doors and aren't talked about in the public sphere, and are used in ways that the government knows but the public doesn't. That's a really great point. We'll move on to our next speaker now, Mohammed Najim. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Bahrain Center for Human Rights, for organizing this. I mean, basically, Bahrain is one of the most sophisticated countries in our region when it comes to online threats from the state's angle. You know, we have been also witnessing this from the beginning, even before the Arab Spring. I mean, we have seen, like, in before 2011, there was an expansion of the online threats inside Bahrain, and it was really one of the first Arab countries who was kind of adopting that. When it comes to the region as well, after the Arab Spring, we have seen a lot of adoption of regulations in the region, especially in the Gulf, where GCC countries have adopted and learned from each other quickly. And we've seen, like, dozens of laws since then have been put into action. We have seen most recently that if you do a like on Twitter, you might be criminalized for this in Bahrain. Or even follow or something. So, like, there's all these restrictions that's happening on the online space. In addition to that, the surveillance is also increasing at the same time. Unfortunately, it's not going to get any better because the targets will only increase, and expanding to what Mo Muscati was saying, it will get more complex as well between the surveillance companies, and more collaboration between the companies and the states. And there's also, we're going to see more and more exploit brokers going into business, and this is actually happening now on the global level, unfortunately. Some of the ideas, I mean, basically, I come to this space from a digital rights, more policy advocacy angle, but some of the ideas that we should think of, and I'm sure it's been happening, but we should keep working on it more and more, is one, we need to really build more coalitions around our region, but also between our region and other Western digital rights organizations. We need to create more pressure on Western-based we need to create more pressure in collaboration with the Western-based digital rights entities on their governments to make some pressure on the region, and also on the companies who are selling these softwares. Like, we really need more checks and balances on these companies who are selling the softwares. I know Bahraini has been active on this, but I think maybe we can do more. I'm not sure. We really need to think about using more the courts. We need to try to prosecute these companies, NSOs and such. We know in the case of Bahrain, there's at least 2 of the activists who have been targeted. They live in exile in the UK, so maybe it's a start. We know, like, this is not easy to use the court, and it's not easy on all these processes, but that's mainly some of the work that we should be working on together as digital rights advocates. Thank you.
Thank you, Najim, for sharing some of those ideas. They're definitely really important, especially since, you know, this issue isn't surrounded just with Pegasus and the NSO Group. It is a number of different organizations from different companies from a number of countries that have sold these technologies to countries like Bahrain. And so it's definitely needed, necessary, that some sort of change is implemented going forward. Now we'll have our last speaker. Amna, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much to the Bahrain Center for Human Rights. Thank you for this opportunity to see old friends. The perk of being last is that my colleagues and friends, they have already said almost everything. And so I have to reinvent myself in a way. And that maybe I would start by a small comparison between Tunisia and Bahrain. I think Tunisia did not put a big package to target dissidents like Bahrain did. And so we're still dealing, for example, right now in Tunisia with surveillance, but to a certain extent, it could be old school comparing to what the Bahraini are observing. But one thing that was very recent, in the beginning of this year, in the protests, the police union in Tunisia used a lot of information that softwares like Pegasus basically would give. Personal information, very confidential information on activists, on LGBT activists, and basically any political movement that was against the government at the time. And they targeted those people. First, they monitored them, monitored their activity online, and also they targeted them to silence them and to put an end to any political mobilization. And so I think this is not really limited to Tunisia. We're seeing it in other countries in different ways. And as much as they want to label it as a matter of national security, I think it's important to call the things by their names. And it's a major breach to privacy and personal data breaching. Again, I would say that comparing to Bahrain, we did not, or till now, we don't know whether Tunisia has put the same package or not, but we joined forces, I believe, with the Bahraini activists in that sense to say, we should stop this. This is a huge threat to personal lives. And also, I think, as Mohammed Najm actually mentioned, we really need to build a coalition between the actors and players in our region, basically, not only the Gulf countries, not only the Middle East, all of the region, including North Africa, to put pressure on our governments to stop using or misusing technologies, basically, whether they have money or they don't, whether they use new technologies or they use old technologies, they really have to stop using and misusing and controlling the cyberspace. Recently, we've been working on a project with SMEX, actually, the Mohal project, and we ended up discovering a lot of surveillance happening on social media content over here. And so people, they are targeted basically from their views on the cyberspace, on Facebook mainly in Tunisia, and they became targeted personally and persecuted for things that have nothing to do with what they were posting in some cases. And I guess this is not a Tunisian practice only, this is a regional practice. One very important thing, I think we can get inspired by each other's actions and what we do in different countries. And like we got together with SMEX and worked on certain topics, I think it's good to work together to put an international pressure on the governments who are misusing the technologies. And so one of the things that Masqati mentioned, the UN Special Rapporteurs also, they emphasize on many occasions that they want to see something coming from us, from our region, to act accordingly. And so we have different platforms that we could use. And this is one of the platforms. The UN could be one of the platforms putting an international pressure and using the international community to help us get, let's not be very hopeful because it's kind of a pinky word, but at least to limit the surveillance and limit the misuse of technology. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emna. I love the inspirational take you have or ending to this, where you talk about how we need to be inspired by each other and how we can learn from each other, to better the practices of all the people in the region. Now that we've concluded our presentations, I want to jump into a brief Q&A and we can just go down the same order, and people can give their thoughts. But the first question I kind of want to pose was, Emna and Najib and Jean talked about creating this coalition of different governments, this international pressure. What is the biggest challenge to bring about some of these reforms that we talked about, or what is the biggest challenge for human rights defenders and individuals who are going through this currently?
Yeah, the biggest challenge, I think, one is getting to each other's agenda, like having the same time, putting the same energy into something like this to make it happen, allocating the needed resources for this, understanding the topic. We're not lacking of expertise in the region, which is a good thing. I mean, just having Muhammad Najm and Muhammad Masat in here shows how much expertise we have. But at the same time, I think understanding the legal expertise is also very much needed. Navigating the system, like the UN system, navigating the international community system also is very much needed. But the most important, I would say, other than the resources that we would allocate all of us, is the legal understanding. And because in some countries like Tunisia, we have texts that could help in terms of personal data protection, but they're outdated, and these technologies, they're ahead of us. They're already in the future. We're so behind. And so we need to understand legally how we can fight them.
I will add just one of the problems we have, especially in MENA, is we don't have regional mechanism that we can use. Like if we go to European mechanism or to African mechanism or the American mechanism, there is really effective mechanism. You can go to the court and you can use the regional mechanism. Regarding MENA, we don't have any kind of mechanism. Like if the local authority abuse your right and you go to the court and they abuse your right, which mechanism you will use? Right, like in Europe, you can use the European Court, the European Human Rights Court, but in our region, there is zero mechanism. We cannot use any kind of mechanism. So this is one of the challenge that the human rights defenders, especially in our region, that facing. That's the first one. Secondly, when we look about human rights defenders in our region, I mean, the balance between between the law and the rights and everything is really it's disappeared, right? And you can see that in our region, the number of repression happening is really high. Like we try to put examples. Like in the beginning, we say that Tunisia is examples for human rights and respecting the law, but then that shift again, and that's also give the other governments ideas and to think that, oh wow, so there is no example. Then we look to the Sudan for a year, and that's also a shift, right? Because also changing. So when we look on this is also supporting the other repressive countries, because the international community don't do anything with all these shifts in the power, and that's also affecting human rights defenders in a way, right? So that's also one of the things that we all also need to push, that when something happened like this, we need to work hard to bring everything back, because other repressive country use these against their local human rights defenders.
Great thoughts. Najim or Salua, do you guys have any thoughts or any ideas about what is the biggest challenge or struggles in trying to tackle some of these policy or on the ground issues?
I mean, thanks, Anthony. One of the main challenges that I see for the next 5 years at least, or even more, are the fast adoption of technologies that's happening specifically in Saudi Arabia and UAE, and how much this is going to affect all the region. We have seen all the plans, we have seen like all the strategies that they are doing, the AI, the smart cities, and all that. And there's really fast adoption of these technologies supported by a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of power. And we should be worried about this. And also all the investments in new technologies and in new apps. I mean, UAE just bought percentage of Telegram recently, a few months ago. Saudi Arabia already owned something in Uber and Twitter, et cetera, et cetera. So there's like all these adoption of these technologies that if they gain control over their decisions in the MENA region, it's really gonna get worse. And I think we are at this stage now. So we need to be thinking about these challenges more deeply.
It's a great point. And I wanted to go back to something that Emna and Salwa had brought up in their presentations, and it was that these technologies, including these more recent technologies that you were just talking about, are often grounded in the government explains that there's some sort of national security context. They're using it for national security. What could be done at that level? Perhaps it's appealing to the international community, but what can be done when countries like Bahrain use these technologies in the name of national security when they're clearly or evidently not? And it's just an open question to anybody that might want to chime in.
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult question to answer because these technologies are evolving so fast. So how can we? I mean, the answer would be to develop policy recommendations, but is it gonna happen fast enough? This is the question.
I would say we need accountability and transparency. We need allies, again, a coalition to work to bring allies to this region, to hold to account countries and governments like Bahrain who can afford this and who are using it. Either it's a national security thing or not. Countries like Tunisia as well. I think you mentioned a very important point, Anthony, and also Najm, about the basically putting a lot of money in these technologies and adopting them. For some countries, like Najm has acquired already, I think we already are, like poor countries like Tunisia, we're already relying on the donation and benefits of these technologies come from foreign countries, foreign governments, and so, in a sort of donation, like the surveillance cameras in the street in Tunisia, they came from Japan as a donation for national security. And it's a big question mark. What else is given to countries like here in Tunisia who cannot afford to put the package for those technologies? If we know any unit in Tunisia, that would be great. We would hold them to account nationally and internationally, but it's so unknown. And I guess this is one of the things. If we start digging by knowing who are using, the units who are using within governments these technologies and misusing them, we can start from there and then ask for more transparency, whether it's really used for national security or just to silence people. and stop any political mobilization. I think that might respond a little bit.
I think also one of the important points is we need to change the meaning of national security, not only in the local level, but also at the international level. When you look to, as example, the Interpol, as example, when receiving requests from governments to take actions or to put someone in the red alert and arresting human rights defenders, stopping human rights defenders in the borders, and transfer human rights defenders from country to another country, that's a problem. That's a big problem, because the meaning of international security in one country is totally different in another country. One country, they don't respect human rights. They have the same rights in other countries that respecting human rights, right? So this is one of the things that we need to look on. We need to put them in a way that's how you do investigation as an Interpol. How you as an Interpol verified these cases, because we have a lot of cases that these people get attacked. I mean, human rights defenders get attacked because of Interpol and other international bodies. So that's one of the elements. And also, when we look to this, also we need to look on the companies, and they're related to the human rights. What's the policy they need to implement? When NSO sell these surveillance tools, they need to look on the history of these governments. And even though that the government will provide a lot of evidence saying, oh, we will use this with the bad people. Bad people in the repressive country is totally different than bad people in other countries that respect the human rights, because human rights defenders in repressive country is the bad people, is the main actually bad people for them. So, and it's a more important than someone stealing money, because someone stealing money is not affecting the government or not affecting the political situation that it is important to the government. So they don't care if they want to monitor that person or spy on that person. But someone talking about freedom, someone talking about human rights violation, it is more risky than someone do a criminal thing. So that need to be changed, because it's not a profit. That's what the company is doing. A profit is the main goal. But we internationally need to change this through investors, through governments, because that's also responsible. Like if NSO in other country, European country, they also responsible for this, because this country allowed them to sell these to repressive countries. So I think all this need to be changed, because human rights, it need to be included in everything, each agreement that this kind of company have, and any political relation with the government also need to be include human rights principle on it. So if we don't do this, we will definitely see abusers and victims from these repressive countries.
I just want to add the last remark, if possible. So while I've been listening to these last remarks, I mean, the whole idea is to change the whole framework around cybersecurity and to include human rights discourse within the international debates. But this is going a long time, I think. But this is more of a question, like, but what can we do right now to protect the human rights defenders? Is there something that we can add to what we're doing right now? that would help defend in the current situation?
I think I will go with what already SMAX is doing now. Is SMAX is prepared for alliance with different organizations. Frontline is now just involved on this. We did also coalition on surveillance in MENA, Frontline and Gulf Centers, and Access Now is working. So there is a lot of initiative in the region. There is actually movement in the region, and it is going well and supported by many organizations, especially SMAX, Access Now, and Frontline. So there is really a movement. The question is where we want to reach, because this will not stop, right? It's even if you finished with the Pegasus, okay, and then we will have other company coming, we will have other government. Maybe next phase is that the government is producing their own malwares, as what happened in Iran as examples. They have their team to produce their own malwares. They don't need, because Pegasus will not be it's not available for the Iranian government. So they produce their own malwares to attack human rights defenders and people. So it's this is a continuous thing. It's not will stop, and it maybe take years to get something from United Nations, to get something from international bodies. So the idea is where we want to reach, where to say that, oh, okay, we did something, and that's a great thing. That's a succeed for us. Until now, we still struggling. We still trying to find our way, and because there is a lot of events happening in the region, it is complicated, and it is hard to understand what is the change that we want actually.
I just want to add that also, like, I feel this is I mean, I agree with everything that's been said. The challenge is big, the struggle is big, but also there's no short-term solution. Like, there's no quick short-term solutions to the big problem, because they all intersect with each other. And it's not only surveillance, it's not only it's everything together, and politics is also part of this. Money and power. I mean, I'm hopeful. I think we should keep doing what we're doing. Talk more to each other, like build more coalitions, especially with global organizations, and internally as well within our organization, within our region. Yeah, and I think we are, all of us here in this for the long run. I mean, I know AMNA for many years now, Muscatee, and Bahrain Center for many years. So like we're all in this for the long run, and I think this is going to take some time. Something we're also doing that I want to mention briefly is Bread and Net. I added next to my name. Please register. It's an event that's happening next month. The idea is to also expand the community and talk more to each other. There's going to be more than 100 sessions around different topics, including surveillance, but not limited to as well. So yeah, that's what I had to say.
Thank you very much, Najim. Now I see we're running out of time, and so I want to give everyone the opportunity to take 1 minute or less, talk about a takeaway they have, they want the audience to have from this event, whether that is for the international community, for governments, for individuals who are in these situations. What message would you like to pass on to them? And we can start in the order that we started the presentation, or whoever would like to chime in.
My message is to control the surveillance tools as soon as as we can, because this is damaging not only the human rights defenders, but damaging the society, actually.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, but yeah, to build up on what Muhammad Najam said is to be hopeful and to try to keep up to date with what's happening and working together.
I can go next. So I think first thing would be democratize digital safety trainings or education as much as we could, so we can limit the damage coming from the misuse of technology, and also activate the coalition among our region, using all the platforms, whether these type of webinars, Bread and Net, or any other platform across the region, to come together to act, basically, to stop or limit the surveillance.
Najim, would you like to say a final word, or we can wrap up here?
No, thank you. I just mentioned everything I said in my last comment. Thank you for everything.
Wonderful. Thank you to all the panelists for joining us, Maskati, Salua, Najim, Amna. It was wonderful hearing all these wonderful these thoughts, insightful thoughts, and hopeful thoughts. For our viewers, definitely check out the resources that each of their organizations provide. Register for Net and Bread. Check out the resources that digital citizenship and Frontline Defenders has for human rights offenders and on this topic. BCHR will publish a summary of the event after, and the recording will stay up on YouTube. Thank you everyone for joining us for this panel. Have a great evening or afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.